My friends, I want to share a story with you today, a story that has touched the hearts of thousands, a story that speaks of faith, resilience, and the incredible ways in which God works in our lives. Maybe you are searching for hope. Maybe you are longing for a breakthrough. Maybe you are wondering if God sees you, if He hears your prayers, if He has a plan for your life. I want you to know He does. And this story is proof that when you put your trust in Him, He will do more than you ever imagined. There was a man who had lost everything. His business had failed, his health was declining, and the people he thought would stand by his side had walked away. He found himself at the lowest point of his life with nowhere to turn. He asked God, why? Why is this happening to me? What is next for me? He felt forgotten, abandoned, and without purpose. But God was not finished with him. In his darkest moment, when he thought he had no hope left, he decided to surrender everything to God. He fell to his knees and prayed, Lord, I don't know what's next, but I trust you. I believe you have a plan for me, even when I can't see it. And that moment changed everything. Slowly, things began to shift. Doors he never expected to open started opening. Opportunities came his way that he could not have created on his own. His business didn't just recover, it flourished beyond anything he had before. His health improved. The loneliness he once felt was replaced with a deep awareness of God's presence. And do you know what he realized? The struggles he went through weren't meant to break him. They were meant to shape him into the person God created him to be. Maybe today you are facing something that feels impossible. Maybe you've prayed for answers but haven't seen them yet. Maybe you feel like giving up. But let me remind you, God is working even when you don't see it. He is preparing something greater than what you could ever imagine. The Bible tells us in Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. That means nothing in your life is wasted. Every struggle, every delay, every disappointment, it is all part of a bigger plan that God is weaving together for your good. The man in this story inspired 300,000 people with his testimony, but the truth is his story is not unique. God is doing this in lives all around the world, and He can do it for you. So I ask you today, will you let this story change your life? Will you choose to trust God even when you don't understand? Will you surrender your fears, your doubts, and your plans into His hands? Because when you do, you will see that He has been leading you all along. The same God who turned this man's life around is the same God who is with you right now. The same God who opened new doors for him can do the same for you. But you must take that step of faith. You must believe that even in the waiting, God is working. If you feel like this message spoke to you today, if you feel like God is calling you to trust Him in a deeper way, don't ignore that feeling. Say yes to Him. Say, Lord, I trust you. I may not know what's next, but I know you do, and that is enough. And when you do, I promise you, your life will never be the same, because when you walk with God, you are never alone. And when you trust Him, He will lead you into a future greater than anything you ever imagined. There are moments in life when everything seems to fall apart. You look around and see nothing but disappointment, failure, and heartache. You may have lost a job, watched a relationship crumble, or received news that shook you to your core. In those moments, it feels like the end of the road, like there is no way forward. You may feel abandoned, forgotten, or even punished. But let me remind you of something powerful today. Your lowest point is not the end of your story. It is often the beginning of something greater. When we go through hardship, we tend to believe that we are alone in our suffering. But God is always present, even in the most painful moments of our lives. He sees your tears, He hears your prayers, He knows your pain, and He has not abandoned you. In fact, He is working through your struggle to shape you into the person He created you to be. Every great story in the Bible, every powerful testimony of faith begins with a challenge, a test, or a moment of brokenness. Think of Joseph, sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused and thrown into prison. He could have given up. He could have thought his life was over, but what did God do? He was with Joseph in the pit. He was with him in prison, and in His perfect timing, God elevated him to a position of power, using him to save an entire nation from famine. What seemed like the end was actually the setup for God's greater purpose. The same is true for you. Your suffering is not wasted. Your pain is not meaningless. God is writing a story far greater than you can see right now. What feels like a setback may actually be a setup for something better than you ever imagined. Romans 8:28 tells us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Not in some things, not only in the good things, in all things. That means even your lowest moments are being used for a divine purpose. But here's the key. You must not give up. You must not allow discouragement to take root in your heart. The enemy wants you to believe that your struggles define you, that your failures are final, and that your pain will never end. But God says otherwise. He says He has plans to give you a hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11, He says He will never leave you nor forsake you. Deuteronomy 31:8. He says that even when you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you should fear no evil, for He is with you. Psalm 23:04. Your lowest point is not the end, because God is still working. He is shaping you, refining you, strengthening your faith. Sometimes we cannot see His hand when we are in the storm, but later we look back and realize that every step was leading us exactly where we needed to be. Even when you don't feel like it. You keep believing even when things don't make sense. You keep trusting even when you can't see the way forward. Because God is not finished with you yet. One day you will look back and see that what you thought was the end was actually a new beginning. The pain you endured will become a source of strength, The trials you faced will become the foundation of your faith, and the testimony of how God carried you through will inspire others to hold on, to believe, and to trust in the one who never fails. Your lowest point is not the end, it is only the beginning of what God is about to do in your life. Hold on, keep the faith. He is not finished with you yet. There comes a moment in life when we realize that our strength is not enough. We try to control everything, our future, our relationships, our finances, our health, but no matter how hard we try, things don't always go according to our plans. We fight, we struggle, we worry, and yet we find ourselves stuck, overwhelmed, and exhausted. But the truth is, our breakthrough doesn't come from working harder, worrying more, or holding on tighter. Breakthrough comes when we surrender to God. The turning point in many people's lives is not when they finally figure things out, but when they finally let go and place everything in God's hands. It is in surrender that we experience His power in ways we never imagined. When we stop trying to control everything and trust that God's plan is greater than our own, we open the door for Him to move in miraculous ways. Think of the story of Peter in the Bible. He was a fisherman, skilled in his trade, yet there was a night when he caught nothing. Despite all his efforts, he had no results. Then Jesus told him to cast his net on the other side. Peter could have argued, he could have relied on his own experience, but instead he surrendered. He obeyed, and because of that surrender, his net was filled beyond capacity. What changed? Not Peter's skills, not his strength, but his willingness to trust Jesus instead of himself. Many of us are like Peter before that moment. We are working hard but seeing no results. We are trying everything we can, yet we feel empty and defeated. We pray, but we still carry our burdens instead of giving them fully to God. But Jesus is standing before us saying, "Trust me, let go. I have a better way." Surrender is not giving up, it is placing our trust in the one who knows what is best for us. It is saying, "God, I don't have all the answers, but I know you do." It is releasing our fears, our plans, and our worries into His hands and believing that He will guide us. And when we do this, we begin to see God's hand at work in ways we never expected. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 3:5-6, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." That is the key. Not leaning on our own understanding, but fully trusting God. When we do, He begins to direct our steps. Surrendering to God doesn't mean that life will suddenly become easy, but it does mean that we will no longer carry the burden alone. It means that instead of being overwhelmed by fear and anxiety, we will walk in peace knowing that God is in control. It means that even when we don't see the full picture, we trust that God is leading us towards something good. So many times we delay our breakthrough because we are still trying to hold on to control. We say we trust God, but we still try to fix everything ourselves. We still stress over the future, still worry about things that are out of our hands. But true surrender means letting go and believing that God is already working behind the scenes. Maybe today is the day you choose to surrender. Maybe today is the day you say, Lord, I give it all to you. My plans, my worries, my struggles, I trust you. And when you do, watch how He moves in your life. Doors will open that you never expected. Peace will replace anxiety. Strength will rise where you once felt weak. And most importantly, you will experience the presence of God in a way you never have before. Surrender brings breakthrough. Are you ready to let go and trust Him completely? There are times in life when we feel like nothing is happening. We pray, we wait, and yet we see no change. We wonder if God is listening, if He sees our pain, if He cares about what we are going through. The silence can be discouraging, but let me remind you of this powerful truth today. God is always working even when you don't see it. So often we base our faith on what we can see, hear, or feel. When things are going well, we believe God is with us. When doors open, we believe He is working. But when nothing seems to be happening, we begin to doubt. We ask God, where are you? Why aren't you answering? But just because we don't see progress doesn't mean God is not moving. He is always at work behind the scenes, preparing something greater than we can imagine. Think about the story of Joseph in the Bible. He was given a dream that he would one day be a great leader, but instead of immediate success, his life seemed to fall apart. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. From the outside, it looked like everything was going wrong. It would have been easy for Joseph to think that God had forgotten him. But what Joseph didn't know at the time was that God was working behind the scenes. Every trial he went through was leading him toward his destiny. The betrayal, the prison, the waiting, it was all part of God's plan to position him for something greater. And in the right time, Joseph was raised to power, second only to Pharaoh, and used by God to save an entire nation from famine. What seemed like setbacks were actually setups for God's purpose. The same is true in your life. You may not understand why you are facing certain struggles right now. You may feel stuck, confused, or forgotten, but God is working in ways you cannot see. He is aligning people, opportunities, and circumstances to fulfill His plan for you. Romans 8:28 reminds us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Notice that it doesn't say some things or only the good things. It says all things, even the trials, the delays, the disappointments. God is using everything for your good, even when it doesn't make sense right now. Sometimes the delay is for your protection. Sometimes the closed door is leading you to something better. Sometimes the waiting is where God is preparing you for the blessing He has in store. If we could see everything God is doing behind the scenes, we would never doubt Him. But that's where faith comes in. Faith is trusting that God is working even when we don't see any evidence yet. When the Israelites stood before the Red Sea, they saw no way forward. The enemy was behind them and the sea was in front of them, but what they didn't see was that God had already made a way. He was about to part the waters. They couldn't see it, but God was working. Maybe today you feel like you are standing at your own Red Sea. Maybe you feel like nothing is happening in your life, but let me tell you, God is working behind the scenes. He is making a way where there seems to be no way. He is preparing blessings that you haven't even imagined. Just because you can't see the full picture doesn't mean He isn't moving. So don't lose faith in the waiting. Don't give up just because you don't see immediate results. Trust that God is working behind the scenes, putting everything together in His perfect timing. One day you will look back and realize that He was guiding you all along. Stay faithful, keep praying, keep believing, because God is moving and something greater is coming. There are moments in life when we pray and wait, yet nothing seems to change. We cry out to God for healing, for direction, for breakthrough, but all we hear is silence. It's in these moments of waiting that doubt begins to creep in. We start asking questions. Has God forgotten me? Does He hear my prayers? Is He even working in my life? But let me remind you of something powerful today. Delay is not denial. Just because something hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it never will. God's timing is different from ours, and His ways are always higher than our ways. What seems like a delay in our eyes is often God's perfect timing at work. One of the greatest struggles we face as believers is learning to trust God's timing. We live in a world of instant gratification. Everything is fast, immediate, and on demand. But God does not operate on our human timelines. He sees the full picture when we only see a small part. His plan is bigger, greater, and wiser than anything we could ever imagine. Think about the story of Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a child, but they had to wait 25 years before that promise was fulfilled. Can you imagine waiting that long? Year after year, they grew older, and the situation seemed more impossible. There were probably moments when they felt forgotten, moments when they questioned whether God would really keep His word. But God had not abandoned them. He was preparing them, testing their faith and making sure everything was in place for His perfect plan to unfold. And in the right time, Isaac was born, just as God had promised. If God makes a promise, He will fulfill it, but He will do it in His time, not ours. The waiting period is not a wasted period. It is a time of preparation. Sometimes God delays certain blessings because we are not ready to receive them yet. Maybe there are things He still needs to teach us. Maybe there are doors that need to be opened or lessons that need to be learned. Sometimes He keeps us in the waiting season to refine us, to strengthen our faith, and to prepare us for something even greater than we expected. Isaiah 60:22 says, "When the time is right, I, the Lord, will make it happen." Notice that it doesn't say if the time is right, it says when. That means the blessing is already planned, the answer to your prayer is already written in God's divine schedule. Your job is not to worry about when it will happen, but to trust that God's timing is always perfect. Maybe right now you are waiting for a door to open. Maybe you are praying for a job, a relationship, a breakthrough in your finances, or healing in your body. And maybe you feel like nothing is happening. But let me encourage you today, don't give up. Keep believing, keep praying, keep trusting. Just because you haven't seen the answer yet doesn't mean it's not coming. God is faithful, and He will fulfill His promises in your life. Remember, sometimes what feels like a delay is actually God's protection. You may be praying for something, but God knows the right timing. He knows what is best for you. He sees the obstacles ahead that you cannot see. If a door hasn't opened yet, it may be because God is protecting you from something you don't even realize. What looks like rejection today may actually be God redirecting you to something better. Think about Joseph. He had dreams of greatness, but before he saw those dreams fulfilled, he went through years of hardship. He was betrayed, sold as a slave, and thrown into prison. If anyone had a reason to doubt God's timing, it was Joseph. But looking back, we see that God was working the entire time. The delay was not denial, it was preparation. And when the time was right, Joseph was elevated to a position of power, fulfilling the purpose God had planned all along. So I want to ask you today, are you willing to trust God's timing? Are you willing to wait with faith, even when you don't understand? Waiting is not easy, but it is in the waiting that our faith is tested and strengthened. The delays you are facing are not signs that God has forgotten you. They are signs that He is still working. Keep believing. Keep pressing forward. Your delay is not your denial. God is preparing something amazing for you. And when the time is right, it will come to pass. Trust Him. There is power in your story. Every challenge you have faced, every trial you have endured, and every victory you have experienced is not just for you. It has the potential to inspire and uplift others. Your journey, no matter how difficult, can serve as a testimony that brings hope to someone else who is struggling. Many times we go through hardships and wonder why. We ask God, why am I facing this? Why is this happening to me? But what if your pain has a greater purpose? What if your struggles are meant to be a source of encouragement for someone else? The Bible tells us in Corinthians 1:04, He comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. Look at the story that inspired 300 people. One person's testimony, his struggles, his lowest moments, and his surrender to God became a beacon of hope for so many others. Why? Because people relate to real stories. They connect with struggles that they too have experienced. When they see that someone else overcame the very things they are battling, it gives them hope that they too can overcome. The enemy wants you to believe that your story doesn't matter. He wants you to think that your past disqualifies you, that your mistakes are too big, that your pain is just something to hide. But God sees things differently. In God's hands, your story is not a source of shame. It is a powerful testimony. He can use what you've been through to change lives. Think about Paul in the Bible. Before he became one of the greatest apostles, he was known for persecuting Christians. If anyone had a past that could have disqualified them, it was Paul. But God took his story, transformed his life, and used him to spread the gospel to nations. Today, his letters in the New Testament continue to inspire millions of believers around the world. Paul didn't let his past define him. He allowed God to use his testimony for his glory. Maybe you've been through financial struggles and God provided a way when there seemed to be no way. Maybe you battled sickness and God brought healing. Maybe you lost everything, but God restored you. Whatever your story is, don't keep it to yourself. Someone needs to hear it. Someone is praying for the breakthrough that you have already received. Sharing your story doesn't mean you have to stand on a stage or have a huge platform. It can be as simple as telling a friend how God has worked in your life. It can be sharing your testimony in a small group, posting it online, or even writing it down for others to read. You never know how God might use it to encourage someone who is going through the very thing you once faced. Many times we think that we need to have a perfect story to be used by God, but the truth is, it is in our weaknesses that his strength is made perfect, 2 Corinthians 12:9. Your struggles, your failures, and your victories all come together to create a testimony that can change lives. Think about the people who have inspired you. Was it their perfect life that encouraged you? Or was it their resilience in the face of adversity, their faith in the midst of trials, their ability to rise again when life knocked them down? Most likely it was their challenges and their unwavering faith that spoke to you the most. That is why your story matters. So I want to ask you today, are you willing to let God use your story? Are you willing to share how he has worked in your life, even if it means being vulnerable? Someone out there needs to hear what you have to say. Someone needs to be reminded that God is faithful, that he restores, that he provides, and that he never leaves us. Your story can change lives. It can bring healing to the broken, hope to the discouraged, and faith to those who are struggling. Don't be afraid to share what God has done for you. Your testimony could be the reason someone else finds their way back to God. So go out and share your story. Let your life be a testimony of God's grace, his power, and his endless love, because your story can inspire the world. Fear is one of the greatest obstacles that hold people back. It keeps us from stepping into the life God has planned for us. It whispers lies in our ears, telling us that we are not good enough, that we will fail, that the road ahead is too uncertain. Fear makes us doubt, hesitate, and remain stuck in the same place for years. But faith is what moves us forward. Faith is what allows us to trust that God knows what's next, even when we cannot see it. All throughout the Bible, we see how faith overcomes fear. When God called Abraham to leave his home and go to a land that he would show him, Abraham had no idea where he was going. He didn't have a map. He didn't have the details, but he had faith. He trusted that God knew the way, and that was enough. Because of his faith, Abraham became the father of many nations.
Think about Peter walking on water. As long as his eyes were on Jesus, he was able to do the impossible. But the moment he focused on the wind and the waves, fear took over and he began to sink. That is exactly what happens to us. When we focus on our problems, our fears, and our uncertainties, we begin to sink. But when we fix our eyes on God, when we trust that He is in control, we can walk in faith no matter what storms come our way. Faith does not mean that we will never feel afraid. It means that we do not let fear control us. It means choosing to trust God even when things don't make sense. The Bible tells us in 2 Timothy 1:7, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind." Fear does not come from God. It is the enemy's way of keeping us from stepping into the blessings and purpose that God has for us. How many times have you let fear stop you? How many opportunities have you missed because you were too afraid to take the first step? Maybe God has placed a dream in your heart, but fear has kept you from pursuing it. Maybe He is calling you to do something new, but the uncertainty makes you hesitate. Let me tell you today, fear is a liar. It is trying to keep you from the incredible future that God has for you. The enemy wants you to be afraid of the future. He wants you to be afraid of failure, afraid of change, afraid of stepping out in faith. But God is calling you to trust Him. He is calling you to move forward, to believe that He is guiding you even when you can't see the full picture. He is already in your future, making a way. One of the most repeated commands in the Bible is do not fear. In fact, it appears over 365 times, one for every day of the year. Why? Because God knows that fear is one of the biggest struggles we face. And He continually reminds us that we do not have to be afraid because He is with us. Isaiah 41:10 says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." That is God's promise to you today. You are not alone. You do not have to walk through life in fear. He is with you, guiding you, strengthening you, and leading you into the future He has prepared for you. So, what will you choose today? Will you choose fear or will you choose faith? Will you let your worries keep you stuck or will you step forward, trusting that God knows what's next? The choice is yours. But remember this: every great breakthrough, every incredible testimony, and every powerful story begins when someone chooses faith over fear. Maybe today is your moment. Maybe today is the day you say, God, I don't know what's ahead, but I trust you. Maybe today is the day you stop letting fear hold you back and start walking in faith. Because when you walk with God, you are never alone. When you trust Him, He makes a way. And when you step out in faith, He will take you further than you ever imagined. So let go of fear and step forward in faith today.